I still remember that night. It all began with a stupid idea, an improvised plan to escape everyday life. Me, Armin, and Chuckleways Chuck, the guy who had a solution for everything, decided to spend the night at the beach. And of course, we wouldn't be there just the three of us. We invited 2 girls to join us. Nothing special, just a quiet night far from the city, beneath the starry sky. Chuck chose the beach, a secluded spot where no one would bother us. I still remember how he said with that mischievous grin, "No one will be there at this hour, just us and the sound of the waves." It seemed perfect. We arrived at the place shortly after dark. The cold sea breeze hit our faces while we laughed and set up a small bonfire. Sophia and I walked away from the group a bit, wandering over the damp sand while Armin and Chuck stayed behind to impress the girls with horror stories. The night was dark, but the moon shone brightly, lighting up the ocean like a vast silver sheet. Then we heard it. At first it was a gentle hum, like an annoying mosquito buzz, but more intense, more persistent. Sophia stopped and frowned. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, when I spotted a red light in the sky, small hovering a drone. "Is someone playing a game with us?" Sophia asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but her voice quivered. I watched the drone, floating and swaying in the air like a predator observing its prey. "This isn't normal," I replied. "We're alone here, or we should be." We went back to the others, and everyone fell silent when they saw the drone. It was spying on us, there was no doubt. Chuck, always the first to react, started yelling to scare away whoever was controlling it, but the drone only pulled back slowly, as if taunting us. "Let's get out of here," Armin suggested, and we all quickly agreed. We put out the fire, hastily grabbed our stuff, and ran to the car. That's when we noticed something strange, a small metal tag glinting on the underside of the vehicle. An air tag. Someone was tracking us. Panic seized us all. Chuck sped along the dark road without looking back. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing like a war drum. Were we being followed? Spied on? By whom and why? We finally reached Chuck's house and locked ourselves in, hoping the nightmare was over. But the real horror began days later when Chuck received an envelope containing photos of me and Sophia at the beach, taken from a high angle clearly shot by the drone. Compromising photos, too intimate for our comfort. We went straight to the police, but there were no leads, just empty answers, and the certainty that something or someone was still watching us. The drone never reappeared, but the fear remained. Even today, we can't look at the sky without a chill running down our spines, as though someone up there is still watching. The choice of beach seemed perfect, secluded, no tourists, far from the crowds that flood the most popular spots in summer. We wanted privacy, a place just for us, where we could relax and enjoy the night. It was Chuck's idea, of course. He always knew places nobody else knew, spots off the map, with no phone signal, no connection to the outside world. It seemed perfect, even romantic, the kind of place you only find if you know someone like Chuck, the friend who always has a trump card up his sleeve, a secret to share. That evening, we trusted him. The idea was simply escape the city, the glaring lights, the constant noise, the people. Just the 5 of us, the sound of the waves on the shore, and the endless sky saturated with stars. When we arrived, the beach was, as promised, deserted. The only light came from the full moon, which seemed huge and close, illuminating the fine sand and the dark sea up to the horizon. The breeze was fresh, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. Armin was in a good mood. laughing and carrying a crate of beers. The girls, Sophia and Lisa, walked along the sand, their laughter ringing out like little bells in the night. We sat near the water's edge and gazed at the sky. The stars were innumerable, a tapestry of glowing dots that felt closer than ever. Chuck started pointing out constellations, mixing science with his fantastic tales as he tried to impress Lisa, who seemed enthralled by his every word. The night was ours, no worries, no interruptions. But there was something about that beach, a strange feeling, almost imperceptible. A silence that did not match the waves or the distant laughter of the other something that seemed to be watching, lurking. I tried to push the feeling away, convinced it was just my imagination. After all, we were here to have fun, and the setting couldn't have been more perfect. Yet the silence was soon broken by that weird, metallic sound that seemed to come from all directions, something flying overhead. At first, no one paid much attention. We were lost in the moment, but then the sound got louder, more present. We looked up and saw Ita drone floating right above us, like an eye fixed in the darkness, a red light blinking as the hum intensified. No one was supposed to be here. This beach was remote-chosen specifically so no one could bother us. But someone was here, watching us. Suddenly, the idea of being so isolated and far from everyone no longer felt safe. Sophia and I decided to distance ourselves a bit from the group, wanting a moment alone, away from Chuck's grand stories and Armin and Lisa's boisterous laughter. We walked over the damp sand, felt the cold water of the sea wash over our feet, while the moon lit our path. The silence there was almost hypnotic, broken only by the gentle sound of waves in the distance. We chatted about trivial things, laughed at silly jokes, when suddenly I felt something strange, not just the chilly night breeze, but something more, something that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I stopped talking and fell silent for a moment. Sophia noticed the change and stopped as well, eyeing me curiously. Then we heard a distant noise that quickly drew closer. A hum, like a giant insect buzzing near your ear. It did not belong to this place. It wasn't the sea, nor the wind, nor anything natural. It was a metallic, mechanical noise, almost threatening. "Did you hear that?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing in the darkness, searching for the source of the sound. The hum intensified, grew louder, and then we saw a red light glowing in the dark sky, moving erratically like a ghost hovering in midair. "It's a drone," I whispered, more to myself than to her. But why was it here? Who would fly a drone at such a deserted beach in the middle of the night? A shiver ran down my spine. That red light seemed to be observing us, a cold and inquisitive eye. Sophia stepped closer, her expression changing from curiosity to concern. "Do you think someone is spying on us?" My mind raced in all directions. Who else knew we were here? Just the five of us, and maybe a few people Chuck mentioned it to offhand. But no one who would suddenly appear in the dead of night with a drone. Yet there it was, hovering above us. The sound of its rotors cut through the beach silence like a menacing whisper. "I don't like this," I mumbled, taking Sophia's hand. "Let's go back to the others." We hastened back, the drone still trailing us, its hum merging with the sound of our hurried footsteps in the sand. Fear took hold, a sense that something was very wrong. By the time we got back to the group, breathless, I didn't even have to speak for everyone to realize something was off. The continuous hum of the drone still echoed above us, the red light blinking ominously in the night sky. Chuckleways so unflappable looked up and narrowed his eyes, cursing under his breath while following the drone's movements. "Is someone watching us?" I asked, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I think someone is using that drone to spy on us." Armin let out a nervous laugh, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. Maybe someone's just messing around, taking aerial photos or something. But his laughter sounded forced, and no one really believed him. "If that were all, why does the drone just hover there, following us?" Sophia interjected, arms folded, her face tense. "This isn't normal." We decided it was time to leave. Chuck agreed, his usual smile gone as we started putting out the fire and gathering our things. But the drone didn't back off. It just floated above us, like a vulture waiting patiently. We got into the car and still felt that invisible gaze upon us. Chuck drove fast, the dark road illuminated only by the headlights. Yet even at that speed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. When we finally pulled into Chuck's driveway, we jumped out of the car as fast as we could, eager to get inside. That's when I noticed something glinting under the vehicle. I crouched down and saw a small metallic device discreetly attached to the bumper. "Wait, what's that?" I mumbled, reaching out to touch the object. As I removed it, a cold shiver went through me when I realized what it was. "It's an AirTag," I whispered, holding the device in my hand. Sophia's eyes widened, and Chuck cursed under his breath. "Someone's been following us," he said, as if still processing the new information. The drone, the AirTag, the rising fear. It all fit together into a disturbing puzzle. This was no coincidence. Someone knew we'd be here. Someone knew exactly where we'd be. "We need to call the police," Lisa suggested, her voice trembling. A part of me knew it wouldn't be that simple. Whoever was spying on us knew what they were doing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that even now, as we stood there, we were still being watched. As if the drone, that merciless eye in the sky, were still out there in the dark, waiting. Panic gripped everyone. The idea that we were followed by someone we couldn't see turned our fear into something tangible and suffocating. It was no longer just unease or a chill on our neck. It was real. Something was deeply wrong, and we had to get away as quickly as possible. "Get in the car now," Chuck shouted, his voice shaking with urgency. Within seconds, we were all inside, hearts pounding wildly. Chuck turned the key, stepping on the gas and leaving the beach behind, the tires squealing on the road. The night's darkness closed around us. Every shadow outside seemed dangerous. Nobody spoke. We all stared at the road ahead, praying that the sensation of being watched would fade away. But it didn't. If anything, it grew stronger. Chuck kept glancing in the rearview mirrors, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. I think we're being followed," he finally said, voice low, almost a whisper. "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, breathless. I turned to look out the back window, and for a moment my heart stopped. Off in the distance, two headlights shone, far but clearly following the same route, keeping a safe distance like a hunter stalking its prey. "That's gotta be a coincidence," Armin mumbled, but he didn't sound convinced. Nothing about that night seemed like a coincidence. "This is no coincidence," I replied, my stomach twisting. "They placed an AirTag on the car. They know where we are, where we're going. They're following us." Chuck stepped on the gas. The car roared down the deserted road, tension filling the air. Each second felt like an eternity. The headlights behind us continued to appear between the trees as we took sharp curves on our way to the false security of Chuck's house. But that fear grew, like a dark shadow whispering in the back of our minds that we weren't alone. Finally, the familiar outline of Chuck's house emerged in the darkness. He drove straight into the garage, and the doors shut behind us with a metallic clang. We got out of the car in a rush, ran inside, locked all the doors, and turned out the lights. But even there, in Chuck's house, the fear didn't vanish. Outside, the headlights disappeared around the corner, but we knew they were still nearby, hiding in the shadows. We sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the window, straining to hear any noise, any sign of an approaching threat. "Now what?" Lisa asked, her arms crossed tightly in front of her, as if shielding herself. "We wait," Chuck answered, not sounding very confident, "and pray they're not still out there." But we all knew the night was far from over, that someone was out there in the dark, still watching us. The following days were strange. We tried to return to normal, to pretend that the night at the beach was just a fleeting shock triggered by fatigue and darkness. But deep down, we all felt the same fear, the sense that something wasn't right, that invisible eyes might still be on us. Chuck was more withdrawn than usual. Normally fearless, he now seemed restless, a nervous look often sweeping his face when he thought no one was watching. Then, a few days later, everything finally fell apart. I was at home trying to relax after a sleepless night when I got a call from Chuck. His voice was serious, almost muted. "I need you to come here right away," he said, without explaining further. The urgency in his voice made my heart race again, dredging up the panic I thought I'd left behind. I got to his place as fast as I could. When I walked in, Chuck was at the kitchen table, his face tense. On the table lay a white envelope with the edges torn as if hastily opened. "I got this morning," he said, sliding the envelope toward me. With trembling hands, I removed a set of printed photos. My hands froze at the sight of the pictures. They were of me and Sophia, taken that night on the beach. But not just snapshots compromising photos from angles no one should have had access to. There we were in intimate moments, laughing, kissing, completely oblivious to someone observing us from a distance with a cold, intrusive lens. Each image felt more invasive than the last, a silent testament to our vulnerability. Sophia, standing next to me, gasped when she saw them. Who did this?" She looked at Chuck, but he just shook his head, as confused and disturbed as we were. "I don't know," he muttered, "but obviously someone who was there that night, someone who knew exactly where we'd be and what we were doing." The panic came rushing back, full force. The photos, the drone, the air tagit all made sinister sense. It wasn't just a bad prank, it was something much darker. Someone had followed us, watched us, recorded our most private moments, and now they wanted us to know. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice trembling as I flipped through the pictures, the feeling of exposure burning in my gut. Chuck shook his head, his jaw clenched in anger. "I don't know. But one thing's for sure. This isn't over." That's when it hit Mathir hadn't gone away because the game wasn't over. Whoever was watching us hadn't stopped. We were just beginning to realize how much danger we were really in. We called the police that same day. Our voices shook with fear, our hands trembled as we explained what had happened. Being watched and spied on drained us. I could see on Chuck and Sophia's faces and everyone else's how shaken we all were. This wasn't a passing fear, it was something digging in deep, like poison in our minds. The police arrived quickly, but their expressions were skeptical and too professional, as though they already knew how this visit would end. They listened to our story patiently, took notes, asked routine questions. The drone, the air tag, the photo saw the pieces of a macabre puzzle. But for them, it was just another odd case among many. They searched the house, examined the envelope, spoke to us one by one. They asked if there was anyone who might want to hurt Yusa Vengeful X, an enemy with a grudge, but none of us had an answer. The mystery only deepened, spreading like a shadow we couldn't penetrate. In the end, the police took the photos and the tracker as evidence, but their faces said it all. There were no solid leads, no suspects, no obvious motive, just the vacuum of empty answers and a trace of doubt. They assured us they'd do everything possible to find out who was behind it, but their words felt like polite promesessa formality meant to calm our frayed nerves. Days went by, and nothing happened again. No more drones, no strange noises at night, no headlights tailing our car. Whoever it was vanished as quickly as they had appeared. But the silence was terrifying, a constant reminder that the threat might still be lurking, unseen, always there. We all tried to move on, but the fear was there in every nervous glance over our shoulders, in every locked window, in every small noise that made our hearts race. Chuck, normally the most confident, began checking the locks 2 or 3 times at night. Sophia seemed withdrawn, constantly staring at her phone like she was expecting something terrible to happen any second. None of us truly forgot that night. Yes, the day-to-day routine continued as if nothing had happened, but inside, we carried invisible wounds. Our sense of safety, the notion we could be out of reach of prying eyes, had been taken from us that night on the beach. Time passed, and we tried to regain control of our lives. But the trauma left its mark. We became more cautious, more guarded, haunted by our own fears. Every unexpected noise, every unexplainable movement turned into a potential threat. The night at the beach became a constant reminder that evil is often invisible, that the most dangerous threats are the ones lurking in the shadows. We didn't see any more drones, photos, or trackers, but our sense of security was irrevocably shattered, and the question that kept haunting us, who was out there in the darkness, and what did they want, remained unanswered. There were no clear answers, no satisfying explanations, only a deep uncertainty that sometimes the greatest danger lies in what we do not understand and cannot see. It was supposed to be just a quiet night. Ricardo and I were exhausted from the routine and worries of the week, and all we wanted was a place where we could forget the world for a few hours. La Valette in New Jersey seemed the perfect small beach town, far enough away to give us a sense of freedom, but close enough to get back home before dawn. Ricardo always had a knack for picking unusual places, and he swore he knew a private beach that was almost always deserted at night. A retreat, he said as we drove through streets lit by faint, watchful lights. The radio played softly, just enough to fill the pleasant silence between us. When we arrived, the beach was exactly as he'd promised, empty, lit only by the pale moonlight and the distant glow of stars. No one else was around. Just the two of us, the cold sand beneath our feet, and the gentle sound of the waves in the distance. We parked our bikes next to a small sand dune and headed toward the water, each step sinking a bit deeper as if the beach itself wanted to swallow us. We sat down in the sand, breathing in the salty air while Ricardo pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offering me one. I accepted. I lit it with a lighter that fought against the wind of the night, letting the smoke float into the air until it disappeared into the darkness. The world around us became a haze of shadows and flickering light, the perfect backdrop for an evening of forgetting. Conversation flowed as it always did between us, and time seemed to stand still under that star-filled sky. La Valette felt like an island of forgotten memories, a place where nothing bad could reach us. Yet suddenly, the silence broke. A strange noise came from nowhere, a metallic hum that seemed to echo. At first it was faint, almost inaudible, but with each passing second it got louder, more insistent. Ricardo turned to me with a puzzled expression. "Do you hear that?" he asked, frowning. I nodded, my heart starting to pound faster. The noise was odd, eerie, like metal scraping or shifting, enveloping us. I looked around, trying to see where it was coming from. The beach was empty, no one in sight, just the sand, the sea, and the dunes around us. "Maybe it's the wind," I ventured, trying to sound sure. But something in me knew it wasn't just wind. It wasn't a sound the wind could make. Then we saw it. On top of a dune stood a tall, slender figure silhouetted against the starry sky, motionless, as though it was watching us. And that metallic hum seemed to emanate from it, echoing in the air, making my stomach knot like never before. "Ricardo," I said, my voice quieter than I intended, almost a whisper. "I see it too," he replied, eyes locked on that figure stark against the night. But it wasn't alone. As we watched, more shapes began appearing around the first one, standing there as still, like shadows lurking in the darkness. My heart raced, panic rising in my throat. Then it hit me. We weren't alone. Something or someone was there with us, and it didn't seem friendly. Ricardo and I tried ignoring the weirdness. After all, we came here to relax, to leave our worries behind, and for a moment, the place was perfect. The sand was cold beneath our feet. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a gentle light on the waves. We moved a bit further from the entry path, looking for the perfect spot at the foot of a dune to settle down and enjoy the night. Ricardo took out some beers from his backpack, the fizz of the bottle cap echoing in the silence. We drank, smoked, and let the hush of the ocean soothe us. Yet that uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach never fully went away. Then the hum returned, a metallic, buzzing noise, initially distant but growing sharper and louder, as though it was closing in. We exchanged nervous glances. I could see the same anxious expression in Ricardo's eyes that I felt in my own chest, a primordial kind of fear I couldn't rationalize. That sound wasn't an engine or the wind. It was something else, as though pieces of metal were rubbing together in a grating, persistent tone. It made the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. It was like the surroundings themselves were conspiring against us, as though something invisible was inching closer. "Maybe it's a boat or an old motor," I offered weakly, but my voice betrayed my rising dread. Ricardo shook his head. "No, there's no boat. The noise is coming from the land or somewhere near the dunes." The hum grew louder, more pressing. We tried to keep calm. We drank another sip, smoked another cigarette, looked at the sea. But the tension hung in the air. Then Ricardo stood abruptly. "We have to get out of here," he said. And for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I looked around, again me eyes moved toward the crest of the dune. More figures appeared, tall, motionless shadows. We counted 3, no, 4, maybe more standing, watching us. The metallic humming grew louder. The beach, which minutes before felt soothing, had turned menacing. We didn't want to believe what we were seeing. We just wanted a quiet night. But that sinister presence and that unearthly hum didn't belong here. It wasn't the normal hush of the ocean or the breeze. It was mechanical, threatening, as if warning us. We took a few steps back, moving toward our bikes. That's when we realized these tall, disproportionate shapes were also appearing at other dune crests. It was as if we were surrounded, cornered. My heart pounded in my ears. "Run!" I shouted. Not even sure if I was speaking to Ricardo or myself, but we both started running. Our feet sank in the sand, making each step more difficult. The hum was unbearable, vibrating through the air, through our bones, more intense with every second, like an invisible wall pressing in on us. Behind us, the figures began to move, not walking, but gliding in a bizarre, jerky motion, as if their limbs were being pulled by invisible strings. Ricardo cursed under his breath. "What are they?" I had no answer. We were too afraid to look back for more than a split second. We had to get away, away from the figures, from that mechanical humming that was swirling around us. We ran so fast I thought my lungs would burst. Finally, we reached our bikes, but as soon as we got close, we realized it was no use. The shapes were closing in, blocking the path. We had no choice. We abandoned the bikes and tore off in the other direction, back toward the lit street, hearts in our throats, eyes scanning for any sign of those creatures. It felt like we were running forever, crossing that cursed beach until we found a street lamp's glow. That's when we stopped, hands on our knees, gulping for air. "Our bikes," Ricardo whispered, half in shock, half in defeat. "Can we go back and get them?" I just shook my head, the realization we'd been inches from something beyond reason creeping in. "No, we need to go now." He agreed, and without another word, we all but sprinted to the nearest taxi stand. We caught a taxi back home, not once looking behind us. On the ride, Ricardo stared out the window, half expecting those dark figures to appear on the road at any moment. The next morning, the fear was still there, clinging to us. We decided to go back in daylight, hoping maybe we could make sense of it all. Maybe it was just panic or an illusion from the previous night. Also, we needed our bikes. But when we got there, something was dreadfully wrong. The bikes were gone. No trace of them. No tire marks in the sand. No indication that someone else took them. It was as if they vanished into thin air. The place where we left them looked untouched, as if no one had been there for months. Ricardo and I just stared at each other, the same thought in both our minds. Whoever or whatever those figures were, they had done more than just frighten us. Somehow, they had taken our bikes or hidden them, or something worse, something we did not want to imagine. We left that spot quickly, barely exchanging words, the tension and fear clinging to us. We knew, without saying it aloud, that we would never return to La Valette, never set foot on that beach again. Losing our bikes was a small price to pay to escape something far bigger and darker than we could grasp. To this day, I wonder what those figures were, what really happened that night. But maybe it's better not to know. My mind occasionally searches for answers. Urban legends, local myths, talk of unearthly entities that haunt deserted beaches. None of it explains what we experienced, how real it all felt, how it took something tangibly or bike sand left us with emptiness and unanswered questions. Time has passed, but the mystery remains. We have no idea who or what those figures were, what they wanted, or where they came from, and we probably never will. It was supposed to be just a getaway from routine. Charles, Riley, and I wanted to spend a weekend away from the city, away from the chaos, obligations, and constant pressure. Charles had a vacation house on Long Beach Island, LBI, as everyone calls it, a place that always seemed inviting for unwinding and escaping everyday life. The house was in a more secluded part of the island, surrounded by dunes and featuring a stunning view of the ocean. We arrived Friday afternoon, just as the sun began dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Charles was especially excited. He loved that house. It was a childhood refuge filled with good memories. For Riley and me, it was a chance to exhale, forget our problems for a few days, and not think about anything. The house was exactly what I'd pictured: cozy, with large windows that let in the sunlight and a porch leading straight to the sea. The crashing waves in the distance created the perfect soundtrack for the weekend we had planned. That first night seemed perfect. Charles suggested a dip in the pool, and none of us objected. The wind was fresh, the air salty, and full of promise for quiet nights. We switched on a few lights around the pool, grabbed some drinks, and relaxed in the water, laughing and chatting about everything and nothing at once. The weekend looked to be going exactly as planned. A bit of sun, a bit more laughter, and a lot of story swapping. Charles was at ease, clearly in his element. Riley, who was always the most carefree one, told amusing tales of his latest travels. I could feel the stress of city life melting away with each passing moment. But fate always has a strange way of changing our plans. And that night under a sky full of stars, something in the atmosphere shifted slightly. Something invisible seemed to vibrate in the air. At the time, we didn't notice, but that comfortable, familiar vacation house would soon become the scene of something much darker and inexplicable. On the second night, Charles, the ever-enthusiastic host, decided we needed more excitement. "Let's spice things up," he said with a mischievous grin, picking up his phone. He proposed inviting a few girls he knew from previous visits to LBI. "They're great, you'll like them," he assured us. Riley and I exchanged knowing looks, shrugged, and welcomed the idea, ready for anything that might make the weekend more fun. A few hours later, the girls arrived. Megan, Claire, and Jessica, all of them friendly and full of life, the kind of people you want around when you're trying to forget the world and live in the moment. They stepped in, and the mood immediately shifted. More laughter, more smiles, more energy. Charles was in top form, reeling off jokes and stories, while Riley, always charming, seemed delighted to have new company. The night was perfect. The full moon rose in the sky, casting an almost otherworldly glow over the pool. We turned on some music, grabbed more drinks, and lounged by the water. We talked about everything and nothing, telling stories, laughing loudly, just enjoying each other's company. The girls seemed at ease, and soon we were all in the water, splashing around, taking advantage of the warm evening. The pool lights sparkled against the water, a golden shimmer in contrast to the starry sky overhead. Megan and Claire laughed, splashing each other playfully, while Jessica and Riley chatted about the latest TV series they were hooked on. Charles, beer in hand, floated contentedly, as though proud of having orchestrated this moment. For a while, it felt like absolute perfection, one of those moments you wish would never end. But there was something in the air that night, a sense of foreboding I couldn't put my finger on, a growing restlessness. Suddenly, Charles stopped laughing. He was staring at something beyond the pool, toward the pier that stretched into the dark sea. His eyes narrowed, and his once relaxed, smiling face turned serious. "Did you see that?" he asked quietly, almost whispering. We all turned to look. At first, I saw nothing, just the night's darkness and the distant reflection of lights on the calm water. Then something moved, a shadow, hazy, near the pier, blending with the darkness all around. "Who's there?" Charles called out, his tone wavering between challenge and caution. Silence was our only reply, and heavy, and for a moment I thought I saw another figure move, then another, lurking at the edges of the pier, dark and unreal, as though waiting for something. Charles's grin vanished. In its place was alertness. He stared intently at the pier, eyes half closed, trying to discern shapes in the darkness. Initially, I thought it was just reflections on the water or a trick of the moonlight. But soon I realized, with a jolt of fear, that it was real. Vague silhouettes of tall, awkward figures blending into the faint light near the pier. They stood motionless, watching us. "Do you see them?" Charles asked, voice tight. We all turned. Megan and Claire, who had been playing in the pool, froze, their smiles replaced by worried glances. Jessica gripped Riley's arm, her eyes wide in the moonlight. They were all staring at the pier, where those figures remained unmoving, silent, like shadows cast by the darkness itself. My heart started to race as the night air grew suddenly colder. "Who are they?" Megan asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I muttered, "but they're watching us." Charles stepped out of the pool, water dripping off him. He grabbed a towel, trying to wipe his face, as if the sensation of dread might rub off. "Hey, who's there?" he yelled, trying to sound confident, but a slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. The wind picked up, carrying his words away. There was no response. The figures didn't move or speak. They just stood there, silhouettes against the horizon, terrifying in their stillness. With each passing second, the tension grew, and I could feel everyone around me holding their breath. Finally, Charles spoke again. "Maybe they're neighbors or people walking by. I don't know. But this doesn't feel right. Let's go inside." We all nodded, hurriedly gathering our things, never taking our eyes off the pier. Yet the figures stayed put, as though confident they had already spooked us enough, or perhaps still waiting for the right moment to act. Inside, the house felt unnaturally silent, the air thick. We locked the doors and drew the curtains, as if to hide ourselves. But we couldn't help glancing at the windows, half expecting to see those shapes pressed against the glass. The tension pressed down on me. I realized that what began as a carefree night was turning into something much more sinister. Charles, his voice low, said, "They're not leaving. I can still see something out there." A sudden noise shattered the sound of something hitting the water, a loud splash. We all froze. Another splash followed, then another, and another. 4 splashes in total, each closer than the last. "They're coming," I heard someone whisper. Panicked, Megan clung to Claire. Jessica pressed into Riley. Charles went pale, staring at the water outside. My heart pounded with such intensity, I thought I'd pass out. We heard the unmistakable sound of vigorous swimming, whoever they were. They jumped in and were heading straight for us. "Inside, now!" I screamed, trying to control my panic. We rushed through the house. Charles locked the front door with a trembling hand. Outside, we could hear water being displaced, heavy, rhythmic breathing as they swam closer. We clustered in the living room, hearts hammering. The lights were off, and only moonlight seeped through small gaps in the curtains. It was impossible to ignore the scuffing of footsteps on wet sand just outside. They had come ashore, and they were close. "They're here," Megan whispered, tears in her eyes. We were surrounded. The only plan we could muster was to stay quiet, to hide and hope they wouldn't come in. But a nagging dread told me that might not be enough. Suddenly, a new horror. The sound of footsteps on the house's second floors low, steady, the floorboards creaking beneath each step. They were no longer outside. They were inside. For a moment, none of us could move. Fear rooted us in place, breath caught in our throats. I looked at Charles, whose eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the ceiling. Riley was gripping Jessica's hand so hard his knuckles went white. Megan and Claire clung to each other, trembling. "They're inside," I whispered, barely audible. How did they get in?" Megan stammered, face stricken. There was no time to think, just to act. "We have to get out of here. Now!" Charles shouted, panic finally breaking his composure. "To the car!" We tore for the front door, hearing the footsteps upstairs quicken, almost as if they knew we were fleeing. We stumbled outside onto the porch, then onto the cold sand. The night wind stung our skin, but we didn't stop until we reached the car, parked right in front of the house. "Get in," I yelled, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. Everyone piled in, slamming the doors shut. Charles climbed into the driver's seat, hands shaking as he turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and never had that sound been more comforting. We sped down the lonely island road, the darkness seeming to chase us. "Call the police," Riley shouted from the back seat, voice cracking with terror. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers, nearly dropping it. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, gave the address, described what had happened. "Please, come quickly," I pleaded, voice taut with panic. The operator assured me a unit was on the way, but the minutes stretched like hours. We kept driving aimlessly, just trying to put distance between us and that house. At last, flashing lights found us on a roadside. We were still trembling, in shock. We recounted our story in broken, fearful sentences. The police escorted us back to the house, their headlights illuminating the driveway. They entered cautiously, guns drawn, searching every room and corner. We stayed outside, hearts still pounding. After what felt like forever, an officer emerged and shook his head. "There's no one inside, but something definitely happened. The place has been ransacked, as if someone was looking for something in particular." My blood ran cold. A sense of vulnerability washed over me. Whoever it was, they knew the house. They'd known how to break in and quickly vanish. All that remained was the echo of footsteps upstairs, the memory of shadows on the pier, and the unshakable feeling that we had narrowly escaped something we couldn't explain. We waited outside under the red and blue lights of the patrol cars, the ocean breeze now feeling harsher, as though it pierced not just our skin but our very sense of security. Charles was devastated. That house was once a sanctuary of childhood memories, and now it would forever be stained by the dread of that night. The police continued their investigation for a few weeks, but lacking concrete evidence, the case was quickly overshadowed by other priorities. We found no sign of the intruders, no answers. No one could make sense of how or why they appeared, or what they wanted. Over time, each of us tried to move on, but the trauma lingered. Charles installed heavy locks and security cameras in his city home. Riley quit making light of alarms and locked doors, and I still wake at night hearing those phantom footsteps above me. No answers ever came. We were left with questions, nightmares, and the realization that security can vanish in a single night. We carry the memory of that eerie silence, the unwavering silhouettes on the pier, and the echo of footsteps in the hallway. Somewhere out there, those people, whoever they were, might still be watching, waiting. Or maybe they've already achieved their goal, to leave us forever changed, forever haunted by the unanswered mystery of that night on Long Beach Island. Thank you so much for staying until the end of these stories. If you've stayed with us this long, it means you liked our tales. I have another creepy story prepared. Just click on the video now appearing on your screen. Thanks again, and until next time.